You know, we have this fascinating idea that being an empath means you're spiritually advanced, more evolved somehow. But I don't mean that warm feeling you get when you help someone or that natural compassion we all carry. Iman, when you really begin to see that what we call being an empath might actually be a sophisticated trap, a beautiful prison made of other people's feelings. And here's what nobody tells you. The very thing you've been celebrating as your gift might be the illusion keeping you from true awakening. Do you ever wonder why the more sensitive you become, the more exhausted you feel? Nobody tells you this, but there's a profound difference between genuine spiritual sensitivity and what most of us have learned to call empathy. You've probably felt it, haven't you? That overwhelming surge when you walk into a room full of people built on a misunderstanding so fundamental that it keeps us trapped in cycles of depletion, boundary violation, and spiritual bypassing. Here's where the danger begins. When we mistake absorption for awareness, when we confuse merger with compassion, we create a version of sensitivity that actually prevents us from awakening to what we truly are. Let me share with you 7 signs that reveal you're not experiencing genuine empathic wisdom, but rather you're caught in an illusion that masquerades as spiritual awakening. The first thing you must understand is this. You believe other people's emotions are actually entering your body. You've convinced yourself that you're literally absorbing their pain, their anxiety, and their joy, like some kind of emotional sponge. And I want you to really hear this, because it's crucial. What's actually happening is far more interesting and far more liberating than you think. It's like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. You feel someone's anger, and you think it's come inside you, that it's now residing in your chest, your stomach, and your nervous system. But think about it this way. When you look at the moon's reflection in a lake, the moon hasn't actually entered the water, has it? The water is simply reflecting what's already there in the sky. Your consciousness is doing something similar. You're not absorbing emotions. You're experiencing a reflective resonance, a kind of sympathetic vibration. I once knew someone who would leave every social gathering convinced they'd taken on everyone's suffering. She'd go home and perform elaborate cleansing rituals, sage burning, salt baths, and energy clearing. And all the while, she was reinforcing the very illusion that was exhausting her. Here's the profound part. The moment you realize that emotions can't actually transfer from one consciousness to another, like water between cups, something extraordinary happens. You discover that what you've been calling absorption is actually just identification. And that's the secret. You're not being invaded by other people's feelings. You're choosing, unconsciously, to identify with them. The second, even more important sign is this. You've made other people's emotional states your responsibility. Do you feel that instant panic when someone around you is unhappy? That urgent need to fix, to soothe, to rescue? You've been taught to call this compassion, but watch closely what's really happening. You're actually trying to control their experience because their discomfort makes you uncomfortable. Think of it as a stage play where you've forgotten you're in the audience. You've jumped onto the stage, grabbed the script from the actors, and you're desperately trying to rewrite the ending because you can't bear to watch the tragedy unfold. But here's what's fascinating. Their tragedy isn't yours to rewrite. Consider this situation. A friend calls you in distress. Immediately, your body tightens. Your mind races through solutions. You can't rest until you've fixed their problem, or at least made them feel better. But ask yourself, who is really suffering in this moment? Are you feeling their pain, or are you feeling your own resistance to their pain? The truth is far more interesting than we've been told. Real compassion doesn't require you to suffer along with someone. In fact, the Buddha made this quite clear. Compassion is the ability to be present with suffering without becoming suffering. When you take responsibility for other people's emotional states, you're not being spiritual. You're actually being controlling, though it's wrapped in the most beautiful packaging of care and concern. And that's the trap. You think you're helping, but you're really just trying to manage your own discomfort at witnessing theirs. The third thing, which is perhaps the most insidious, is that you have no idea where you end and others begin. Your boundaries aren't just weak. They're practically non-existent. And you've been told this is because you're so open, so connected, and so spiritually attuned. But I want you to consider something radical. What if having no boundaries isn't a sign of spiritual advance, but rather a sign of a fragmented sense of self? It's like trying to define the shape of water when it's pouring over the edge of a glass. Where does the water in the glass end and the spilled water begin? You can't tell anymore, can you? Watch what happens in nature. Every tree has bark. Every cell has a membrane. Every ocean has a shore. Boundaries aren't walls that separate us from life. They're the very thing that allows life to take unique form and expression. Without your skin, you wouldn't be empath. You'd be a puddle of organs. Yet somehow, we've been taught that spiritual people should have no emotional or energetic skin, that we should merge with everyone we encounter. I've watched this play out countless times. Someone identifies as an empath, and within moments of meeting them, they're telling me their entire life story, asking invasive questions, and offering unsolicited advice, all while believing they're being authentic and connected. The beautiful secret is this: real connection requires two distinct beings. You cannot truly meet another person if you've disappeared into them or they've disappeared into you. Intimacy isn't fusion. It's the space between two sovereign beings choosing to share their inner worlds while maintaining their own centers. And the fourth, the most critical of all, is that you're addicted to feeling needed. This one cuts deep, doesn't it? You've built an entire identity around being the person others come to with their problems. You're the good listener, the shoulder to cry on, the one who always understands. And somewhere in your heart, you know that if people stopped needing you, you'd have no idea who you are. Think about it this way. If someone came to you tomorrow and said, "You know what? I've figured everything out." If someone said, "I don't need your help anymore," would you feel relieved, or would you feel abandoned? Be honest. For many self-identified empaths, being needed is the drug that keeps the illusion alive. It's a peculiar form of codependency, dressed up in spiritual clothing. Here's what I want you to see. When you need to be needed, you unconsciously seek out people who are struggling. You might even, though you'd never admit this, feel disappointed when people solve their own problems without you. You've confused love with rescue and connection with enmeshment. The ancient wisdom teaches us something profound about this. The Tao Te Ching says that the master doesn't rescue people, but rather teaches them to rescue themselves. Even Jesus walked away from the crowds regularly, understanding that his presence wasn't what healed people. Rather, it was their own faith, their own inner awakening. When you're addicted to being needed, you're actually preventing the very healing you claim to facilitate. You're keeping people dependent rather than empowering them to discover their own strength. And you're doing this because your identity, your sense of worth, and your very understanding of who you are depend on their continued need for you. The fifth thing you need to understand is this. You believe your sensitivity makes you special, separate, and different from everyone else. You've joined an invisible club of highly sensitive people, or empaths, and you wear it like a badge that simultaneously elevates you and victimizes you. Do you see what's happening here? You've created a spiritual ego around your sensitivity. It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? You claim to feel everything everyone else feels, yet simultaneously, you believe you're fundamentally different from everyone else. You're more aware, more feeling, and more tuned in. But here's the question that dismantles the entire structure. If you truly felt what others felt, wouldn't you realize that everyone is just as sensitive as you are? Watch a construction worker's eyes when he talks about his daughter. Watch a businessman's face when he remembers his mother. Watch anyone, truly watch them, and you'll see that sensitivity isn't distributed unequally. It's the human condition. What varies is not sensitivity, but rather how defended people are against their sensitivity. Some people have built thick walls. Others, like you, have built permeable membranes. But underneath, the capacity to feel, tosins, and to be moved by life is universal. When you identify as special because of your sensitivity, you're actually creating separation. You're building a subtle superiority that says, I feel things you don't feel. I understand things you don't understand. And this prevents real connection, real understanding, and real awakening. The truth is far simpler and far more beautiful. You're not special. You're not different. You're not more evolved. You're simply a human being who hasn't yet learned to regulate your nervous system, establish healthy boundaries, and distinguish between your own feelings and your projections onto others. The sixth sign, and this one is absolutely crucial, is that you use your empathy to avoid your own inner work. You're so busy feeling everyone else's pain that you never have to face your own. It's the most sophisticated spiritual bypass I've ever witnessed. Think of it as a garden that requires weeding. But instead of tending to your own garden, you're running around trying to weed everyone else's gardens, while your own becomes overgrown with unexamined wounds, unprocessed trauma, and unfelt grief. Do you ever notice that the moment you sit down to be with yourself, to truly inquire into your own heart, you suddenly remember someone who needs your help? Your phone is in your hand, you're texting, you're checking in, and you're reaching out. Anything to avoid the discomfort of your own unprocessed material. Here's what's really happening. By focusing on everyone else's emotional weather, you create a perfect distraction from your own inner climate. You've become an expert at reading others while remaining illiterate about yourself. Consider this. When was the last time you sat in silence with your own feelings, without immediately trying to understand them through the lens of how others might feel? When was the last time you grieved your own losses without comparing them to someone else's suffering? The profound part is this: real empathy, genuine compassion, can only arise from a person who has done their own inner work. You cannot hold space for another's pain if you're running from your own. You cannot offer clarity if you're living in confusion. You cannot guide someone through darkness if you haven't walked through your own. And that's what makes this illusion so dangerous. It feels like spiritual work. It feels like growth, but it's actually avoidance dressed in the robes of service. The seventh and final sign is perhaps the most liberating to recognize. You've confused empathy with telepathy. You believe you know what others are feeling, thinking, and needing. And you act on these beliefs as if they're facts. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, you're wrong. What you're experiencing isn't genuine intuition about another person's inner state. It's projection. You're feeling your own feelings and attributing them to others. You're running your own stories and believing they're their stories. It's like watching a movie with the sound off and making up all the dialogue yourself. then insisting that's what the characters are really saying. I've seen this countless times. Someone will say, "I could feel that she was angry at me," when in reality, the other person was thinking about their grocery list. Or, "I knew he was judging me," when he was actually admiring them. Your nervous system picks up subtle cues, absolutely. But then your mind weaves elaborate narratives based on your own wounds, your own history, and your own fears. And you call this empathy. Real intuition is quiet. It doesn't come with stories. It doesn't need interpretation. It's a simple knowing that arises without the narrator, without drama, and without the certainty that you know what's happening in another consciousness. The moment you think you know what someone else is feeling, you've stopped being present and started being presumptuous. You've left the territory of genuine connection and entered the realm of mind reading, which is just another form of control. True empathy says, "I don't know what you're experiencing. Tell me." False empathy says, "I already know what you're feeling," and then proceeds to treat the other person according to that assumption. So here we are, back to where we started. These are 7 signs, 7 illusions that masquerade as empathic gifts. All of these connect because they're built on the same fundamental misunderstanding, the belief that you're separate from life itself, and therefore you must protect yourself from it, absorb it, control it, or merge with it to feel safe or spiritual. But here's what this all means. Here's the beautiful secret that dismantles the entire structure. You are not an empath who needs to learn better boundaries or protection techniques. You are consciousness itself, temporarily playing at being a separate person. And consciousness doesn't absorb emotions. It doesn't merge with others. It doesn't need protection from life. It simply witnesses, experiences, and allows everything to arise and pass without grasping or rejecting. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are not even particularly special. You're simply awake enough to feel, but not yet awake enough to understand what's feeling. The exhaustion you experience isn't from absorbing other people's emotions. It's from the constant effort of maintaining this false identity as someone who absorbs emotions. It's from the work of having no boundaries, of taking responsibility for others, of avoiding your own depths, of needing to be needed, of believing you're special, of pretending to know what others feel. That's what's exhausting. Not the empathy itself, but the story you've built around it. The next time you find yourself drowning in what you think are other people's feelings, pause. Ask yourself, whose feelings are these, really? What am I avoiding in myself by focusing on others? What would happen if I let people have their own experience without my interference? What if my sensitivity isn't a burden to manage, but simply awareness, learning to recognize itself? Remember what we've explored today. The cage you're in isn't made by your empathy. It's made by your beliefs about your empathy. And the key to the cage has always been in your hand. You are not the ocean trying to fit into a teacup. You are the space in which both ocean and teacup appear. This is the dance we're all part of, this remembering and forgetting, this playing at separation while never actually being separate. And so the journey continues, this beautiful, terrible, ordinary, extraordinary journey of waking up to what you've always been.